Get that grease monkey away from my jet before he blows us all sky high." The voice sliced through the humid air, dripping with laughter and disgust, while the man in the torn flannel shirt, his skin marked by years of sun and struggle, tightened the final bolt without a word. Phones flashed, recording every second as a crowd of executives and staff piled ridicule on top of mockery, turning the emergency repair of a multi-million-dollar aircraft into a public spectacle. Bets were placed in whispered circles, 10 minutes before the engine exploded, 15 if they were lucky. No one stepped in, no one stopped the jeers. They didn't need to say why they believed he would fail. It was written in the glances they exchanged, in the smirks that curled their lips. They didn't see a savior fighting to keep them alive. They saw a man they had already judged by the dirt under his nails and the color of his hands. What they didn't realize was that their laughter was building their own funeral pyre. If you want to know how one silent mechanic turned an entire empire of arrogance upside down, hit like, subscribe, and tell me, what would you have done if you were standing on that tarmac? And where are you watching from today? The sun hung low over Clearwater International Airport, casting long gold streaks over the gleaming tarmac. Inside the private aviation sector, the atmosphere buzzed not with the anticipation of takeoff, but with the sharp, glinting energy that only appeared when egos clashed behind polished glass. The Carter Aviation Board, adorned in sleek suits and expensive watches, gathered in the executive lounge, nursing lattes that cost more than some workers' entire paychecks. They weren't here for business as usual. Word had spread. An emergency engine issue had grounded Delaney Carter's prized private jet. In theory, it was urgent. In practice, the executives found entertainment elsewhere. As they peered through the glass at the runway, an old battered Chevy pickup rolled onto the service lane. Heads turned, eyebrows rose, murmurs rippled through the room. Out stepped Marcus Hayes. His boots were scuffed, his jeans faded, and his hands already bore the telltale stains of grease that no soap could ever truly remove. He didn't look around or wave for assistance. He simply slung a heavy canvas bag over his shoulder and headed toward the jet, every step steady, every movement efficient. From the observation window, Bryce Walton, director of engineering, snorted. "Well, that's a new one," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. "Did we order Uber mechanics now?" Laughter bubbled up in the lounge, polite but poisonous. Travis Dean, his second in command, smirked and pulled out his phone. "I'll Venmo anyone $20 if this guy actually knows what a turbine blade is," he quipped, earning another round of laughter. Landon Price, standing near the coffee cart, tilted his head, eyeing Marcus like one might a curiosity at a carnival. "He probably thinks the engine's under the hood," Landon said, grinning as he poured a second helping of imported espresso into his cup. Marcus, oblivious, or simply uninterested in the mockery unfolding yards away, reached the jet. He set his bag down and began a meticulous inspection, his fingers gliding over the sleek silver skin of the aircraft, like a musician checking an ancient instrument for hidden cracks. Inside the lounge, Chelsea Moore, a flight attendant assigned to Carter Aviation's elite flights, snapped a photo of Marcus through the glass and captioned it, "Meanwhile in budget repairs," before sending it into a private group chat of employees. No one stopped her. No one thought twice. After all, to them, this was harmless fun. What harm could there be in laughing at a man who, by every outward appearance, didn't belong here? Samantha Reed, CEO of Carter Aviation, stood farther back from the window, arms crossed, unreadable. She said nothing. She made no move to join the laughter. But she didn't intervene either. Not yet. In truth, Samantha didn't quite know what to make of the man in the battered pickup. He didn't match the high-priced technicians her company usually contracted. He didn't match the expectations, and expectations in places like this were everything. Outside, the breeze stirred Marcus's flannel shirt as he knelt by the landing gear. His focus was absolute, his attention drawn to a small but telling residue under the engine panel, a subtle sign few would have caught without years of experience. The laughter in the lounge began to taper off, replaced by a restless tension. People found seats, checked their phones, busied themselves pretending they hadn't been so openly derisive. But the undercurrent remained. Marcus Hayes, with his rusted truck and grimy hands, didn't belong on their He didn't belong in their world. It was written in the curl of Bryce's lip, the arch of Travis's brow, the casual cruelty etched into Chelsea's texts. It was spoken without being spoken. Success looked a certain way, and Marcus was the wrong shape, the wrong color, the wrong everything. Still, he worked. Still, he moved as though the weight of their disdain slid off his back like rain off an old jacket. Samantha watched him closer now. Something about the way he inspected the jet, not hurried, not boastful, unsettled her. It wasn't incompetence she sensed, it was something rarer, deep, patient knowledge, the kind that couldn't be bought with a trust fund or taught at Ivy League schools. Landon Price leaned closer to Bryce and said quietly, $10 says he short-circuits something and we have to call an actual team. Bryce chuckled without looking up from his phone, where he was already drafting an email to Delaney explaining the inevitable. Delay, blaming it, naturally, on underqualified emergency contractors. He never considered that Marcus might succeed. No one did. That was the real joke. That was the real reason behind their easy laughter, because to believe otherwise would mean admitting that someone they dismissed in an instant could possibly know more, achieve more, matter more than they did, and that was unacceptable. Outside, Marcus unrolled a set of battered, well-used tools, each one gleaming faintly despite its age. He adjusted his cap against the sun's glare and set to work, methodically disassembling part of the panel with the care of a surgeon opening a chest cavity. Inside the lounge, Samantha's gaze narrowed. She felt it, some shift, some tremor in the normal order of things. Maybe it was the way Marcus ignored the judgment burning through the glass walls. Maybe it was the certainty in his hands, the economy of his movements. Or maybe it was simply the fact that, deep down, Samantha Reed had always hated the club of privilege that people like Bryce and Travis clung to so desperately. Whatever it was, she stayed watching as the others turned away, certain the man outside would soon prove them right. Prove he didn't belong. Samantha wasn't so sure anymore. She didn't know it yet, but the world on the tarmac was about to change forever. Marcus wiped his hands on an old rag and reached down for his toolbox, unaware, or perhaps simply indifferent to the growing cluster of men emerging from the terminal doors. Bryce Walton led the pack, flanked by Travis Dean and several others, their polished shoes clicking against the concrete with the precision of a corporate army. Bryce's voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the morning air before Marcus could even unlatch his case. "Check his ID," Bryce ordered, not bothering to address Marcus directly. Someone like him shouldn't be anywhere near $100 million jet. The words hit the air like a slap, loud enough that even ground staff nearby stiffened but said nothing. It was not a suggestion, it was a command fueled by entitlement. A belief so deeply ingrained that Bryce didn't even register the insult dripping from his tone. Travis Dean, emboldened by the laughter from their earlier gathering, grinned wide and pulled a battered old baseball cap from behind his back, tossing it lazily toward Marcus. "Here," he said with a mocking chuckle. "Might want to wear that. Fits the rustic vibe you've got going, buddy." The hat landed at Marcus's feet, the frayed brim curling upward as if mocking him too. The other men chuckled low and mean. Marcus glanced down at the hat, then back up at Travis without a word. His face betrayed no emotion, but a muscle twitched once at the corner of his jaw. If they thought their antics would provoke him into some outburst, they were sorely mistaken. Samantha Reed stood a few feet away, arms crossed tighter now, her gaze colder. She hadn't intervened yet, but the set of her mouth had changed. The sharp CEO instincts that had built an empire were kicking in. Landon Price, not wanting to miss his moment, sidled up beside Bryce and added, "We should get him a name tag too, visitor from nowhere." Another round of laughter peeled across the tarmac. Even some of the security staff smiled behind sunglasses. The casual cruelty was a shared language here, an unspoken agreement among those who believed their wealth and lineage rendered them untouchable. Bryce stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that the difference between their tailored suits and Marcus's worn flannel became a visual metaphor for the invisible walls they were reinforcing. "Listen, sport," Bryce said, voice oozing with fake patience. "This isn't a scrapyard. It's a precision-engineered miracle you're standing next to. Unless you want to be paying off a lawsuit for the next 3 lifetimes, you'd better stay the hell away from anything important." Travis snorted, bumping fists with Landon behind Bryce's back, as if the verbal beatdown was a team sport. Marcus finally knelt to open his toolbox, the metallic click of the latch punctuating the heavy silence around him. Without looking up, he said quietly, "You called for an emergency tech. I'm it." His voice was low, even, unshaken. Bryce blinked, momentarily thrown off by the simple refusal to engage in their humiliation ritual. For a beat, no one moved. Then Travis, unable to help himself, nudged the dirty cap a little closer to Marcus with the toe of his designer shoe. "Emergency tech," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Must have been a clearance sale." Samantha's fists tightened at her sides. She had tolerated arrogance before, business sometimes demanded it, but this naked contempt based on nothing but appearance and prejudice, made her stomach twist. Still, she watched, measuring. Marcus said nothing more. He simply unrolled a faded, well-worn set of tools onto the pavement, their surfaces gleaming faintly under the harsh morning light. The tools spoke for him, in a language none of the men around him seemed capable of understanding. Discipline, experience, mastery. Bryce wasn't impressed. He scoffed, waving a hand dismissively at the scene before turning to Travis and muttering loudly enough for Marcus to mistake the turbine for a lawnmower engine. They laughed again, their voices bouncing off the hangar walls. Marcus extracted a socket wrench from the roll and stood, squinting up at the jet's engine housing, reading it the way a veteran surgeon reads a patient's chart. Travis, bored now that their victim wasn't fighting back, pulled out his phone again and began scrolling, already composing a new message for the board about the... Nearby, Chelsea Moore finished sending her photo of Marcus and received a flurry of laughing emojis in response. "Make sure to CC the insurance team," Bryce added, straightening his tie with exaggerated precision. "They'll want to know who to sue when things go sideways." Assuming he doesn't get electrocuted first. Another low laugh rolled through the group. It wasn't just disdain anymore. It was a game, a sport played by men who had never been told no, against someone they assumed had no recourse, no weapons but silence. Samantha watched it all unfold, the words, the gestures, the assumptions stacking one atop another like kindling, and she felt an ember of something hot and dangerous flicker deep within her chest. Not yet, she told herself, not yet. Let them dig deeper, let them show exactly who they were. Marcus, meanwhile, moved on to inspecting the fuel intake. His back was straight, his hands steady, his focus complete. The noise around him faded into a low, meaningless hum. He had learned long ago, in fields much rougher than this, that dignity wasn't something others could strip away unless you handed it to them. And Marcus Hayes had long since decided no one got to take his dignity for... He noted a faint discoloration near the base of the intake valve, a warning sign, and mentally logged it for closer inspection. Samantha's gaze sharpened. He's not just poking around, she realized. He's diagnosing, actually diagnosing, and the so-called experts who had laughed the loudest hadn't even noticed. Travis's voice floated over again, loud and careless. "Hey Marcus, when you're done playing hero, you think you could rotate my tires too?" Bryce laughed so hard he had to brace a nostril onto his pristine loafers. Samantha didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She just stared at Marcus Hayes, the man they thought was invisible, and realized that maybe, just maybe, Clearwater Airport was about to witness something it would never forget. The laughter still echoed faintly as Marcus moved methodically beneath the wing, checking the hydraulic lines with the patience of someone who knew time and attention to detail were his greatest weapons. Behind him, the laughter may have softened, but the contempt had only sharpened, growing into something thicker, heavier. Something that filled the air even without words. The handful of passengers wandering toward the private boarding area glanced over casually, catching fragments of the scene. The old pickup truck parked crookedly against the service entrance, the man in worn boots and a flannel shirt kneeling by a multi-million-dollar jet, the cluster of well-dressed executives sneering behind their lattes and luxury watches. Yet no one stopped. No one asked questions. They registered the scene, logged it as "not my problem," and kept moving, eyes sliding away as easily as flipping a page they didn't care to read. A security guard standing a few yards away adjusted his belt and deliberately turned to face the opposite direction, feigning sudden interest in the arrival schedule flashing on the monitor nearby. It wasn't that he didn't notice, he simply chose not to act. In places like Clearwater, where image was currency and status bought silence, the quiet collaboration of the bystanders was as lethal as the insults themselves. Marcus didn't need to look up to feel the eyes on him, to hear the unspoken verdicts hanging in the air. Poor, out of place, disposable. Chelsea Moore, standing with a clipboard in hand near the private lounge entrance, watched Marcus for a long moment. Her manicured fingers hovered over her phone before she finally raised it just below chest level and snapped a quick photo, making sure no one official caught her. She tapped a few times, adding a caption dripping with disdain. Rough day for Skylux, farming out repairs to actual farmers apparently. The words popped up under the grainy image of Marcus hunched over a landing strut. She hit send into the Skylux employee group chat without a second thought. Within seconds, emojis and laughing gifs flooded in. "OMG," one attendant posted. "I'd sue if I were the plane," another joked. Chelsea smiled to herself, feeling the small, petty thrill of joining the private joke. She didn't see cruelty. She saw camaraderie, the warm belonging that came from laughing at someone else's expense, the effortless elevation of us over them. A few feet away, Travis Dean leaned against a service cart, refreshing his phone to see the meme Chelsea had sent. He let out a sharp bark of laughter and turned the screen toward Bryce Walton, who chuckled and shook his head, murmuring something about lowering standards these days. Even pilots passing by caught glimpses of the photo, smirking as they slipped into cockpits and first-class lounges, carrying the story forward with whispers and sideways glances. Samantha Reed saw it happen. She saw the way Marcus's photo shot through the employee network like wildfire, the way heads bent together and laughter spread like a contagion. She saw the way no one objected. Not the boarding agent, not the flight attendants, not even the supervisors who prided themselves on professionalism during audits. They had decided Marcus was a joke before he even touched the plane, and now they were piling on safe behind their group chats and private texts. She watched Bryce elbow Travis playfully, Travis almost spilling his espresso, and Samantha's jaw tightened. The atmosphere wasn't just toxic, it was engineered that way, nurtured by years of entitlement and the smug certainty that nothing would ever challenge them. Outside, Marcus worked. He worked while they laughed, while they whispered, while they shared memes behind tinted glass. He worked like a man who understood that the world he moved through wasn't made for him, but he could still master it piece by stubborn piece. As he tightened a valve clamp with precise, even pressure, a maintenance cart trundled past him, driven by two junior ground techs who snickered and made no effort to hide it. "Hey man," one called, voice thick with mockery. "You sure you're not looking for the delivery entrance?" His buddy cackled as they drove by, tires squealing slightly on the hot tarmac. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even look. He logged the insult like he logged the corrosion under the second engine mount. A threat, sure, but nothing he hadn't weathered before. Bryce, still sipping his overpriced coffee, took out his phone and pulled up the photo again, this time forwarding it to a regional manager with a wry note. "Your emergency response team is slipping. Thought you'd appreciate the laugh." Samantha Reed saw that too. Every click of a send button, every smirk exchanged, built a damning case in her mind. Not just against Bryce and Travis, but against the entire culture they had cultivated. The rot that allowed them to see a man doing his job with precision and grit, and still label him a joke, simply because he didn't look like their mirror image. Marcus moved to the starboard engine, crouching low to check the primary fuel coupling. His hands, steady as stone, traced the worn bolts and discolored panels with a familiarity that spoke of years, decades spent listening to the language of machines when people refused to hear him. Chelsea received another flurry of responses on her post. More emojis, more jokes, a few suggesting new captions for a second photo. Emboldened, she snapped another picture from a different angle and sent it with the tag, "When you mix up Uber Eats and emergency aircraft repair." The meme rocketed through private Slack channels, through WhatsApp groups, through message boards meant for company updates. In the span of 15 minutes, Marcus Hayes had become the day's unofficial entertainment across half the Skylux ground crew, and not a single person paused to consider what that said about them. Not one. Samantha stared through the glass, feeling the slow simmering burn of something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Rage, not at Marcus, at everyone else, at the machine around her, so polished on the outside, so rotted inside. She watched Marcus stand, stretch the kink from his back and wipe his hands again. He glanced once, briefly, toward the terminal, where he surely felt their eyes but never met them directly. Then he turned back to the engine, back to the only language this place hadn't poisoned yet. The simple, stubborn act of doing the work. Bryce turned to Travis, smirking. "Place your bets," he said quietly. How long before this clown trips a circuit breaker and takes the old airport down? Travis laughed under his breath, already tapping out odds on his phone like it was all some sporting event. Marcus didn't hear him. Marcus didn't need to. Some battles you could hear coming a mile away, even when your back was turned. Marcus adjusted his grip on the socket wrench, feeling the slight give of worn metal under his calloused fingers. The chatter from the terminal still buzzed at the edges of his hearing like static, but he tuned it out, zeroing in on the delicate engine lines ahead. Precision was everything here, and despite the crowd's open derision, Marcus knew that any mistake could cost lives. He needed more data, no matter how good his instincts were, no matter how many thousands of hours he had spent under the hoods of aircraft and engines alike. Guessing wasn't an option when a machine this size was involved. Straightening up, Marcus set his wrench down carefully on the tarmac and turned toward the cluster of executives, still lingering like crows around a battlefield. He raised his hand slightly, catching their attention without demanding it, and called out in an even tone, "I'll need access to the engine diagnostic system." His voice carried across the open space, crisp and professional. For a moment there was a pause so thin it might have gone unnoticed to someone less attuned to the currents of power and prejudice that thrummed here. Then Bryce Walton stepped forward, hands in his pockets, an easy smirk stretching across his tanned face. He exchanged a brief glance with Travis Dean, whose eyebrows lifted in silent, malicious amusement. Bryce's voice was lazy, almost casual as he replied, "Access to the system? You?" He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if Marcus had just asked for the keys to the CEO's private vault. "Tell you what," Bryce continued, his voice rising so the others could hear. "The ice cream truck outside probably has more advanced technology than that $10 0-cents toolkit you're swinging around." Laughter broke out behind him, the kind of laughter that didn't just cut it erased. It erased the request, the professionalism, the skill behind it. It reduced Marcus's presence to a caricature, a punchline. Marcus held Bryce's gaze without blinking, without flinching. He didn't move, didn't lower his hand, didn't step back. He simply waited. Bryce's smirk widened. "Diagnostics access is restricted," he said, voice syrupy with false sympathy. "Company policy. Liability concerns, you understand. Gotta protect the jet from accidents." Another ripple of laughter, another volley of glances passed between the executives and the uniformed staff nearby, sealing Marcus's isolation. Samantha Reed, still watching from inside the terminal, made no move to intervene. Not yet. She was watching the currents shift, watching to see just how deep this river of arrogance ran. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned back toward the jet without another word, picking up his wrench with the slow, deliberate movements of someone measuring every decision against the weight of 1,000 unspoken consequences. They had denied him the tools he needed to do the job properly. They had mocked his request as if it were a joke. Fine, he would work without them. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Bryce watched him for a moment longer, then clapped Travis on the shoulder and said loudly, "Guess we'll see what duct tape and wishful thinking can do today." Travis laughed and pulled out his phone again, fingers flying as he sent yet another update to the Skylux management group. "New tech prefers intuition over diagnostics. Pray for our bird." Meanwhile, Marcus crouched by the engine, his eyes scanning the exposed panels, his hands moving with the economy and precision of long practice. He had been trained to trust machines before he trusted men, and right now, the engine was speaking to him in a language none of the executives could ever hope to understand. He spotted another subtle anomaly, an irregularity in the mount tension that suggested strain, possibly linked to the fuel leak he suspected. Without system data, he had to rely on tactile feedback, the faint vibrations that told stories most engineers forgot how to hear once they started relying solely on screens. Around him, the world kept spinning in its petty orbit of laughter and disdain. A ground crew supervisor walked by, openly sneering as he passed. A young intern from operations snapped a sneaky photo of Marcus from behind a supply cart, already composing another meme for the employee group chat. No one offered help. No one offered data. They just watched, waiting for him to fail, convinced they would be proven right. Samantha Reed's nails tapped silently against the frame of the observation window. She saw the denial of resources. She saw the setting of a trap disguised as corporate policy. She saw, most importantly, that Marcus didn't so much as hesitate. that even when every system was rigged against him, he kept moving, kept working, kept trusting in something that had nothing to do with their approval and everything to do with his own integrity. Marcus leaned into the access panel and pulled a small mirror from his toolkit, angling it carefully to check the hard-to-see sections of the engine housing. His breath slowed, his mind narrowing to a single focus: find the flaw, fix it no matter what they said, no matter how they laughed. He saw it then. A fine, nearly invisible hairline crack tracing along the housing bracket, spiderwebbing outward under stress. Left unchecked, it would fail catastrophically under pressure, ripping apart half the wing assembly mid-slight. A mistake like that would kill everyone on board. Bryce Walton, Travis Dean, the VIP passengers waiting in the luxury lounges. They didn't even know how close they had come. And they never would, unless Marcus fixed it. Unless he could fix it. Marcus exhaled slowly, carefully lowering the mirror back into his bag. No diagnostics. No confirmation. Just him, his hands, and the knowledge etched into his bones from a lifetime of working harder, smarter, longer than anyone who thought themselves better by default. He stood, stretching his back, and moved toward the cargo bay where the maintenance manuals were usually stored, hoping against hope that someone had forgotten to lock them. Behind him, he heard Travis laugh again. Man probably thinks duct tape is certified aviation repair. Bryce smirked. Maybe we should hand him some zip ties too. Really let him work his magic. Their words rolled over Marcus's back like water over stone. He didn't need their permission. He didn't need their respect. All he needed was enough time to save them from themselves. Marcus pushed open the cargo bay door and stepped inside the narrow, dimly lit space, the faint smell of hydraulic fluid and hot metal filling his lungs. There was no diagnostic tablet waiting for him, no maintenance laptop, nothing but a battered laminated manual pinned to the wall like a relic from another era. He flipped it open, scanning the dense text and outdated diagrams with quick efficiency, his mind cataloging every deviation from the reality he had seen with his own eyes under the engine cowling. Outside on the tarmac, the small crowd of executives and staff continued to swell, their numbers growing as word spread about the show happening at Gate C-17. Travis Dean stood at the center of it, one hand theatrically shading his eyes from the morning sun, as he pretended to study Marcus's movements. Like a circus ringleader sizing up a new act. "All right," Travis called out, voice rising above the low murmur of conversation. "I'm taking bets. Who's in?" A few heads turned, some employees shifting uncomfortably, others grinned wider, feeding off the attention. He pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket and held it aloft. "I got 20 that says this bird goes up in flames inside 15 minutes if we let Farmer Joe here keep poking at it." Bryce Walton laughed loudly, slapping his thigh for emphasis. 15 minutes? You're an optimist, man. 10 tops." Another 20 appeared in Bryce's hand, then another from Landon Price, who added with a smirk, "Only thing more flammable than that plane right now is his resume." Chelsea Moore, standing near the gate entrance with her arms crossed, bit her lip to stifle a giggle, then nudged the young intern beside her, who was already pulling out his phone to record the impromptu betting pool. Money exchanged hands, slips of paper scrawled with times and outcomes, and somewhere in the middle of it all, someone started a group text thread labeled simply, "Countdown to Disaster." Marcus emerged from the cargo bay holding the manual, his face set in calm lines. Brady Thickner. He could hear the laughter. He could feel the weight of 100 unseen eyes digging into his back like splinters. But he didn't react. He didn't glance their way. He didn't slow his step. He returned to the engine and dropped to one knee, spreading the manual across his thigh, and tracing the schematics with one grease-darkened finger, double-checking every assumption he had already made by touch and sight alone. "Come on," Travis shouted, waving his arms like a carnival barker. "Who else wants in? Winner gets free drinks tonight and bragging rights forever when this whole damn tarmac lights up." More laughter, louder now, less restrained. It carried through the open space, over the polished steel of the service trucks, across the wings of the private jets glinting in the sun. It was a laughter that didn't see Marcus as a man at all, but as a prop, a target, a vessel for their own insecurities dressed up as superiority. Samantha Reed, from her perch inside the executive terminal, heard it too. She watched as the pool of money grew, in the hands of the jeering executives. She saw the maintenance crew huddling near the fence, pointing and laughing like schoolchildren at recess. She saw Chelsea snapping another discreet photo and sending it off with a caption so casual, so vicious, that it twisted Samantha's gut even before she read the words. When DIY meets VIP, pray for us. Samantha's knuckles whitened around the ceramic coffee cup she hadn't touched in over an hour. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to shut it down, to remind these people who and what Carter Aviation claimed to be. But she didn't. Not yet. Not while the rot needed exposing fully. Marcus adjusted a hose fitting with delicate precision, tightening the seal without overstraining the aged component. Haste was as deadly as weakness. Over his shoulder, he could hear Travis egging the crowd on, the words slamming into him like stones. Hey Marcus, you got your marshmallows ready? 'Cause when that engine pops, we're having a barbecue. The crowd roared, a living, breathing organism of cruelty. Marcus said nothing. He didn't even twitch. His hands moved steadily, methodically, aligning the seals, checking the mounts, tightening the final bolts. Every click of his wrench was a beat against the war drums they pounded, every completed adjustment a refusal to let them define him. Bryce leaned toward Travis, pretending to shield his mouth like they were sharing some grand illicit joke. Bet he doesn't even know torque specs, he snickered. Probably just tightening till he hears a crunch. Nah, Travis shot back. He's using good old-fashioned hopes and prayers. Another wave of laughter swept the tarmac. Another $20 bill was slapped onto the growing stack in Travis's hands. Samantha Reed leaned closer to the glass, heart hammering. She felt the moment building like a thunderhead over the plane's pressure, static, inevitability. The cruelty had peaked now, fattened on its own momentum. It was no longer about Marcus. It was about them. About the monster they had built, unchecked and unchallenged, feeding on itself. Marcus tightened the final valve, closed the access panel with a quiet click, and stood slowly. His shirt clung to his back, damp from the relentless Florida heat, but his posture remained unbowed, his expression unchanged. He wiped his hands on a rag, glanced once at the sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue, and then turned to check the auxiliary power connections. Behind him, Travis made a big show of checking his watch. Tick-tock, he called, loud enough for half the airport to hear. 10 minutes till liftoff, or life down. Another round of cheers, another explosion of mean-spirited laughter. Marcus didn't rise to the bait. He never did. That was what infuriated them most. The refusal, the unbreakable wall of silence. Samantha stared at him through the glass, feeling something crack inside her, a deep, angry sympathy she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She knew then, knew beyond any doubt, that the moment of reckoning was coming. It was not a question of if, it was only a question of when. The laughter continued behind him like a sickly drumbeat, but Marcus had tuned it out long ago, his mind narrowing to a razor-sharp focus as he knelt once again beneath the massive silver belly of the jet. Sweat traced slow, steady lines down his temples as he adjusted the mirror he had wedged against the engine intake, angling it carefully to peer deeper into the narrow crevices of the fuel system. It was there, just past the main ignition coil, that he saw it. The telltale shimmer of corrosion, a thin, cancerous spiderweb across the primary fuel line. Marcus's stomach clenched instantly, but his hands remained steady. The fuel line was not just cracked, it was actively degrading, eaten away by time and exposure, now mere inches from the live coil that could spark with the smallest surge of static. One bad vibration, one jolt, one unlucky burst of electrical discharge, and the entire jet would erupt into a fireball large enough to take half the runway with it. Marcus lowered the mirror slowly, methodically, as if any sudden movement might trigger the inevitable catastrophe already lurking beneath the polished surface of the aircraft. His mind raced through possibilities, options, contingencies. There wasn't time to request replacement parts through official channels. There wasn't time to explain or debate. There was only action, immediate and precise. He reached into his kit and pulled out a reinforced fuel sleeve, one of the few advanced tools he kept on hand for worst-case scenarios like this. As he worked quickly to stabilize the compromised line, he became dimly aware of the shifting energy around him. Travis Dean had moved closer, his phone casually tilted upward, the lens pointed directly at Marcus. Not far behind him, Bryce Walton stood with a smug expression, his own phone already recording, while Chelsea Moore pretended to adjust a clipboard but in truth was snapping photo after photo with gleeful precision. They weren't documenting his work to help, they were documenting it to destroy. waiting for a mistake, waiting for the wrong move they could weaponize against him. If Marcus slipped even slightly, they would have the footage ready, edited, captioned, spun into evidence of his incompetence. It didn't matter that they were the ones who had denied him the diagnostic systems. It didn't matter that he was repairing a life-threatening flaw they had missed. To them, Marcus Hayes was nothing more than a scapegoat waiting to be sacrificed. He could feel the lenses on him as acutely as a surgeon feels the scalpel in his hand. Every movement was a risk, every adjustment a potential death knell. Yet his hands never wavered. He clamped the reinforced sleeve over the corroded section, securing it with a double-braided wire tie designed for high-pressure fuel systems, working blind and by feel alone. The chatter behind him quieted slightly, not out of respect, but out of calculation. They were waiting for the spark, the mistake, the catastrophe. Samantha Reed, watching from the window, leaned forward imperceptibly, her breath shallow. She didn't know exactly what Marcus had found, but she could read the shift in his body language, the intense stillness of a man standing on the edge of disaster. Her gut twisted harder than ever. Marcus tightened the last connection, wiped a smear of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and stepped back to inspect. The repair wasn't pretty. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. It would hold. It had to. Travis Dean, sensing that something had happened, called out mockingly, "Hey, need some duct tape to go with that Master Puix, Chief?" A few people laughed, but there was a tension under it now, a tremor of uncertainty. Even they could feel it, could sense the weight of whatever Marcus had just diffused with his bare hands. Bryce muttered something under his breath and tapped a quick message into his phone, sending footage to the internal group chat with the caption, "Miracle worker or disaster waiting to happen? Place your bets." Marcus ignored them. He began checking the auxiliary systems, methodically ensuring that no secondary lines had been compromised, knowing that if there was even one hidden flaw left untreated, all his work would be for nothing. His hands moved with the certainty of years spent fixing problems no one else wanted to acknowledge, in places where there were no second chances, no do-overs. Behind him, the executives and staff buzzed like a cloud of vultures circling a wounded animal. Cameras still raised, voices lowered now, conspiratorial. Samantha Reed's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the final pieces fall into place. The last layers of arrogance and cruelty stripping away to reveal the raw, ugly truth beneath. They hadn't just underestimated Marcus. They had endangered lives, sacrificed safety on the altar of their own prejudice. And Marcus's silent, stubborn, brilliant Marcus had chosen to save them anyway. Bryce Walton smirked and turned to Travis, whispering, "Give it another 5 minutes. We'll see if our hero's magic touch holds up." Travis snorted in agreement, tucking his phone back into his pocket as if the verdict were already decided. Samantha saw something they didn't. She saw the way Marcus double-checked every connection, the way he recalibrated the intake systems by ear, the way he felt the thrum of the engine like a second heartbeat. She saw competence. She saw mastery. She saw the quiet, inexorable rise of a reckoning none of them were prepared for. Marcus wiped his hands once more, packed away his tools with careful precision, and finally stood fully upright, facing the polished fuselage of the jet he had just saved from incineration. The tarmac shimmered under the punishing sun, the air heavy with heat, with expectation, with the brittle, dangerous hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the fuel line patched and reinforced, gleamed faintly under the protective sheathing he had installed. It would hold. Marcus knew it with the same certainty he knew the feel of an honest engine under his hands. He turned slightly, catching a glimpse of Bryce, Travis, Chelsea, and the others lurking just beyond the edge of his vision, their expressions still painted in sneers but tinged now with the barest edge of doubt. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His work would speak louder than any words ever could. Marcus stood still for a moment longer, the sweat on his forehead stinging his eyes, the roar of silence around him louder than any laughter that had come before. Then, from the far end of the terminal, the glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, and Samantha Reed stepped onto the tarmac. She moved like a blade unsheathed, every step precise, sharp, cutting through the thick humidity and the knot of arrogance and cruelty gathered before her. Her heels clicked against the concrete, a sound far louder than any of the jeering voices that had mocked Marcus minutes before. The executives turned one by one, the easy smirks on their faces faltering, fading entirely as they registered who was approaching. Bryce Walton straightened hurriedly, smoothing his tie with nervous fingers. Travis Dean's phone slipped slightly in his grasp as he fumbled to lock the screen, the hastily taken videos still open on his device. Chelsea Moore stiffened, her hand instinctively covering the phone she had been using to document Marcus's supposed failures. Samantha's expression was unreadable, her mouth set in a grim line, her eyes twin shards of cold steel. Without a word, she raised a single hand, palm outward, a silent command. The ground crew froze. The maintenance supervisors stopped mid-step. Even the security guards turned toward her, their postures stiffening under the weight of authority that needed no announcement. "Stop all activity," Samantha said, her voice carrying cleanly across the tarmac. "Now." Engines idled into silence, conversations choked off mid-word. The laughter that had poisoned the air evaporated like mist under a sudden, burning sun. Samantha didn't slow. She didn't waver. She reached the gathered cluster of engineers and executives and surveyed them for a long, charged moment, letting the silence stretch and coil tighter around their throats. Then she turned toward the nearest security officer and said with a voice like polished stone, "Assemble every member of the technical crew assigned to this aircraft immediately. I want them standing here, in front of this jet, within 2 minutes." The officer, recognizing the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without hesitation, snapped to attention and moved swiftly to carry out her order. Bryce swallowed hard, glancing around as if searching for an escape route that no longer existed. Travis shuffled awkwardly, the earlier bravado draining from his posture like water from a cracked vessel. Within moments, the entire maintenance and supervisory staff had gathered before the aircraft, forming a loose, uncertain semicircle under the unrelenting Florida sun. Some shifted from foot to foot, others stared at the ground, but most kept stealing nervous glances at Samantha, trying and failing to read her expression. Marcus remained where he was, tools packed neatly at his side, standing straight-booked beside the aircraft he had just saved, his face calm but watchful. Samantha let the silence stretch a beat longer, then two, until the tension vibrated through the— Finally, she spoke. "In the last 45 minutes, she said, each word precise, surgical, Marcus Hayes has diagnosed, isolated and repaired a catastrophic fuel line failure that would have led to a complete engine detonation mid-air." She paused, letting the weight of that sentence settle heavily over the gathered crowd. "Had this defect gone unnoticed," she continued, her voice sharpening, "it would have triggered an explosion powerful enough to destroy not only this aircraft, but a significant portion of this runway and everyone within it." A murmur rippled through the staff, a low, horrified intake of breath that no one dared voice fully. Bryce opened his mouth as if to interject, but Samantha cut him off with a single, slicing glance. "This aircraft is valued at approximately $220 million, she said, turning slightly so that her voice carried not just to the crew, but to the onlookers still hovering near the terminal doors. "The lives that would have been lost today, passengers, pilots, ground crew number in the hundreds." Her gaze swept the crowd, pinning each face in turn. "And yet," she said, her voice softening just enough to become infinitely more dangerous, "the professionals assigned to safeguard this aircraft, 15 engineers, supervisors and technical staff, all drawing salaries well into 6 figures, failed to detect this lethal flaw." She let that sink in, the numbers clanging against the inside of their skulls louder than any reprimand could. Bryce's face flushed an ugly shade of red. Travis shifted again, visibly sweating now, not from the sun. "Meanwhile," Samantha continued, her voice cold and implacable, "the man you mocked, the man you photographed, the man you wagered against like a spectacle at some traveling sideshow, he found it, he fixed it." Her words sliced clean through the crowd, leaving a brutal, ringing silence in their wake. Marcus stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his presence undeniable. He didn't smile, he didn't smirk, he didn't need to. Samantha turned fully now, facing the line of shame-faced executives and staff with the force of a hurricane masked in silk. "This isn't just a failure of technical proficiency," she said, her tone colder than steel dipped in ice. "It's a failure of character, a failure of judgment, a failure of leadership." Several of the staff flinched visibly under the onslaught. Chelsea's hands twisted in the hem of her blazer. Landon Price stared fixedly at his shoes. Samantha paused one final time, drawing a breath so deliberate it felt like the entire tarmac held its own in sympathy. "From this moment forward," she said, her voice dropping, "this aircraft and any future critical maintenance operations will be directed by Marcus Hayes." She let that sentence linger. Let it shatter whatever remaining illusions of superiority clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Samantha Reed hadn't just endorsed Marcus. She had handed him the very keys to their kingdom. And in that instant, the ground shifted irrevocably beneath their feet. The air around the gathered staff seemed to thicken, weighed down by the unbearable gravity of what Samantha had just said. Before anyone could muster even a stammer of protest, she reached into the leather portfolio tucked under her arm and withdrew a stack of crisp sharpness as she stepped forward, unfolding the top sheet with a casualness so deliberate it felt like the drawing of a sword. Bryce Walton opened his mouth. Whether to object, deny, or plead was unclear, but Samantha didn't so much as glance at him. Her focus was absolute. She held the contract up, letting the sunlight gleam off its golden Skylux insignia emblazoned at the top. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice slicing clean through the stunned silence. "Marcus Hayes is hereby appointed Chief Technical Officer for Carter Skylux Aviation." She paused just long enough to ensure the words hit their intended targets square in the chest. Gasps echoed quietly from the gathered staff, the executives paling visibly under the force of the announcement. Samantha wasn't finished. She tapped the signature line of the contract with one immaculately manicured finger. "This appointment is accompanied by a 5-year executive agreement," she continued, "valued at $10 million, with full authority over all engineering and technical operations effective today." Her voice carried the cold precision of a verdict delivered in a courtroom, and in many ways, that's exactly what this moment was. Bryce stumbled back half a step, color draining from his face, as if the sun itself had abandoned him. Travis Dean let out a choked noise, a lasp or maybe a gasp, but it died immediately when Samantha turned her gaze to him next. Chelsea Moore shifted uncomfortably on her heels, her phone slipping unnoticed from her hand to the concrete, with a soft, damning clatter. Samantha Reed was not done. She allowed a beat of heavy silence to settle over the tarmac, let it seep into the pores of everyone present. Then she drew a second set of papers from her portfolio, this time clipped together under a bright red cover, labeled Emergency Corporate Action. "Furthermore," Samantha said, her voice lowering into something almost tender, which only made the devastation she delivered next more brutal. "Effective immediately, the corporate shares held by Bryce Walton and Travis Dean in Skylux Aviation holdings are being seized under emergency misconduct clauses." Bryce's mouth opened again, but no sound emerged. Samantha continued without mercy. "Those shares, together valued at approximately $14 million, will be liquidated and transferred into a newly established foundation dedicated to funding technical education scholarships for underrepresented communities." She let the words hang there, every syllable a hammer striking the iron of their down. "Short," Samantha said, her tone deceptively soft. "The wealth you built on arrogance, cruelty, and neglect will now build futures for the very people you deemed unworthy." It was a surgical strike, a masterstroke of poetic justice, so complete that even the air seemed to flinch under its weight. Around them, the staff who had jeered now stood hollow-eyed, realizing that the rules of the game they thought they controlled had shifted beneath their feet like quicksand. Marcus Hayes stood a few steps away, silent, immovable, his hands loosely clasped behind his back. He made no move toward the contract Samantha held out. He did not beam with triumph, he did not gloat. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of solemnity, of acknowledgement, not to Samantha, not to the gathered staff, but to the moment itself, the gravity of what had just transpired. He didn't need the cheers of the crowd that had once laughed at him. He didn't need their approval. His work, his skill, his integrity had spoken louder than any slander or meme could ever hope to shout. Samantha extended the pen toward him without a word. Marcus took it quietly, his grip steady, and bent to sign his name on the contract with deliberate care. Behind him, the executives shifted awkwardly, the realization dawning that they had not just lost a battle, they had lost the war. Their wealth, their influence, their pride had been stripped from them with the same swift clinical precision they had once used to strip dignity from others. Samantha took the signed contract, folded it neatly back into her portfolio, and turned to address the staff again. "This," she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of finality that broke to no argument, "is what merit looks like. If any of you cannot abide by that standard, you are welcome to submit your resignations by the end of today." No one spoke. No one moved. The world had shifted, and they were still scrambling to find their footing in the wreckage. Samantha turned back toward Marcus then, a rare flicker of something almost resembling warmth softening the hard line of her mouth. "Welcome to the future of Skylux," she said simply. Marcus nodded once, a gesture as quiet and powerful as a battle cry whispered into the bones of a broken empire. He did not smile. He did not sneer. He stood with the quiet dignity of a man who had walked through fire and come out tempered, not scorched. Around him, the remnants of the old guard stood stunned, stripped bare by their own cruelty, their own hubris, left to reckon with the ashes of everything they thought untouchable. The silence on the tarmac after Samantha's declaration felt like the heavy calm that precedes a devastating storm. No one spoke, no one moved, and the usual arrogance that had once oozed from the executives now hung limp around them like soaked rags. Marcus remained still, the signed contract tucked neatly back into Samantha's portfolio, the weight of justice already rippling outward through the stunned crowd. It didn't take long for the consequences to arrive. Within the hour, the Carter Skylux corporate compliance team descended on the scene like a precision strike unit, armed with clipboards, sealed folders, and the sharp-eyed determination of professionals who smelled blood in the water. Bryce Walton, once so smug and untouchable, was the first to be cornered. In front of his peers, his subordinates, and the very man he had mocked, he was handed a thick packet stamped, "Notice of Internal Audit and Termination Pending Investigation." His hands trembled slightly as he skimmed the bolded accusations: misappropriation of funds, falsified maintenance reports, unauthorized expenditure of corporate resources, and dereliction of duty. The preliminary evidence was damning, and Bryce, for all his years of maneuvering and self-preservation, knew he would not survive this. His assets, his properties, his shares all frozen pending investigation, his accounts seized, his reputation irreparably scorched. Somewhere inside his mind, a small, incredulous voice whispered, "This isn't happening," but it was. Samantha Reed had made sure of it. Bryce was escorted from the premises minutes later, flanked by 2 corporate security officers, his face a frozen mask of disbelief and terror. His last glimpse of the runway was not of a shining aircraft awaiting his inspection, but of Marcus Hayes standing beside the jet he had saved, steady as a mountain, unbothered, undeniable. Travis Dean's downfall was no less swift, no less brutal. As Bryce disappeared into the terminal, Travis was approached by 2 representatives from the National Aviation Standards Board. Word had already reached them of the violations discovered under Travis's oversight, violations that, had they remained hidden, would have led to unimaginable catastrophe. His certification, once his golden ticket to prestige and power, was revoked on the spot. Effective immediately, Travis Dean was stripped of his aviation maintenance license, barred from working for any commercial airline or private aviation company on the continent. The shock of it hit him like a physical blow. His world, once built so confidently atop the pillars of nepotism and bravado, crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. He tried to argue, tried to stammer excuses about miscommunication and delegation errors, but the investigators listened with blank faces, unimpressive. His pleas were filed away as irrelevant. He was finished. A ghost before he even left the tarmac. Meanwhile, Chelsea Moore, once so eager to snap clandestine photos and post mocking captions, found herself thrust under a very different spotlight. The videos and images she had so gleefully circulated had surfaced publicly, leaked by an unknown source but traced easily back to her device. The captions, laced with thinly veiled racism and contempt, spread like wildfire. Within hours, every major airline and aviation group in the country had blacklisted her. Job offers evaporated. Colleagues who once laughed with her now cut her dead with a single glance. She became a pariah, a living cautionary tale for the dangers of arrogance and casual cruelty. Chelsea's name was scrubbed from the Skylux employee registry before the afternoon ended, her security access revoked, her known. She was escorted from the airport under the same silent, pitiless gaze she had once reserved for Marcus Hayes. News outlets picked up the story within the day. Headlines blared across financial sites and corporate watchdog platforms. Skylux scandal, racism, negligence, and a mechanic's triumph. Subheadlines told the deeper story. Billion-dollar company saved by man it tried to discredit. Comment sections exploded with rage and dedication in equal measure. Anonymous sources fed journalists every ugly detail. Photos, chat logs, betting pools, all of it. The public backlash was instantaneous and ferocious. Bryce Walton's face appeared on every financial scandal blog from New York to Silicon Valley. Travis Dean's revoked license was posted publicly on the National Registry of Aviation Violations. Chelsea Moore's leaked screenshots trended worldwide on social media under hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Aviation. Carter Skylux Aviation, under Samantha Reed's ruthless crisis management, issued carefully worded statements acknowledging the internal misconduct and praising Marcus Hayes's exceptional heroism and technical skill. But the damage was done. Investors demanded sweeping reforms. Internal policies were rewritten overnight. Diversity and ethics training sessions were mandated across all departments with immediate effect. Samantha did not shield the company from its shame. She wielded it as a weapon, carving out the rot with surgical precision. Through it all, Marcus remained a silent center in the storm. He didn't gloat as Bryce was marched off the premises. He didn't sneer as Travis Dean's desperate protestations fell on deaf ears. He didn't even flinch when Chelsea Moore burst into tears as she was escorted away, her carefully curated future dissolving before her eyes. Marcus simply stood there, the Florida sun catching the edge of his worn boots and faded flannel, a monument to resilience, to quiet, unwavering excellence. Around him, the empire that had once mocked his every step lay in shambles, too down not by rage or revenge but by the unassailable truth of competence and character. And the world finally irrevocably was beginning to take notice. The weeks following the downfall of Bryce Walton, Travis Dean, and Chelsea Moore unfolded with a strange and solemn quietness, as if the very air at Clearwater International had changed. The laughter that once polluted the terminal like thick smog had vanished, replaced by an uneasy reverence that lingered whenever Marcus Hayes walked the tarmac. His promotion to Chief Technical Officer became official, and though he stepped into his new role with the same calm humility he had always carried, the landscape around him was irrevocably altered. News outlets eventually moved on to fresher scandals, but inside the world of aviation, the impact remained like an old scar, a reminder that prejudice, once exposed, leaves permanent marks. Chelsea Moore disappeared from the public eye for a time, her reputation too tarnished for even the most forgiving companies to touch. But unlike others who might have drowned in bitterness, Chelsea faced her disgrace with a slow, painful awakening. Stripped of status, opportunity, and the easy camaraderie of her former peers, she spent long nights reckoning with the choices that had led her to this ruin. In the silence of her small apartment, surrounded by unsent resumes and unanswered calls, she found herself scrolling endlessly through forums and videos documenting Marcus's story, reading comment after comment from young, aspiring engineers who spoke of how he had inspired them, how he had shown them that their dreams could survive even the ugliest of obstacles. Something shifted in her then, something deeper than regret. It was understanding, born not from fear of consequence but from a genuine, aching shame. With the severance she received, small compared to what she once envisioned, but enough to matter, Chelsea established the Marcus Hayes Technical Scholarship, an annual fund dedicated to supporting underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation mechanics and engineering. She named it without fanfare, without public relations announcements, without seeking redemption through headlines. She did it quietly, sending the papers herself, signing the check with hands that trembled slightly as she mailed it to Carter Skylux new Diversity and Opportunity Division. She did it because it was right. Meanwhile, life at Clearwater continued its cautious evolution. Training programs were overhauled, recruitment policies rewritten. Samantha Reed made it her personal mission to ensure that what had happened to Marcus would never happen again, not under her watch. And somewhere amid the slow, grinding machinery of change, a familiar figure emerged from the edges of Marcus's past. Landon Price, the same man who had once laughed, who had once wagered on Marcus's failure, approached the CTO's office one crisp morning with nothing but a worn canvas portfolio in hand and humility etched deep into the lines of his young face. He didn't wear a suit this time, no polished shoes, no mocking smirk. Just jeans, a simple work shirt, and eyes that couldn't quite meet Marcus's when he spoke. "I don't expect forgiveness," Landon said quietly, his voice roughened by weeks of shame and reflection. I want to learn. The right way this time. If you'll let me." Marcus studied him for a long moment, the hum of, but Marcus Hayes did not believe that justice ended with punishment. True justice, he knew, was creating space for those willing to rebuild themselves from the ashes of their mistakes. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Show up at 5, Marcus said simply. "Bring gloves. And forget everything you think you know." Landon's shoulders sagged in relief, gratitude flooding his features. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste it." And true to his word, Landon arrived before dawn each morning, ready to sweep hangars, clean engine bays, inventory tools, whatever was needed. No task too small, no hours too long. He learned not just the technical skills that Marcus imparted with patient rigor, but also the lessons that could not be found in manuals or training videos, the lessons of humility, perseverance, respect. Over time, others began to notice the shift. Ground crew, technicians, even junior executives started to speak differently, to act differently, their tones softer, their judgments slower. Not everyone changed overnight, and not all changes were pure, but the current had shifted, pulled by the quiet, relentless gravity of one man's example. Marcus never sought recognition for it. He never gave lectures or demanded apologies. He simply showed up every day, did the work, expected the same excellence from those around him that he demanded from himself, and trusted that the seeds he planted in stubborn, rocky soil would someday bear fruit. And they did. Slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. Chelsea's scholarship sent its first recipient, a bright-eyed young woman from Atlanta, to an elite aviation program, her tuition fully covered. Landon completed his internship and earned his certification, eventually rising to become one of the most respected young engineers in the region, never once forgetting where he started or who had given him the chance to start over. Bryant Walton disappeared from the headlines, Travis Dean faded into obscurity, and Chelsea Moore rebuilt her life one apology, one act of penance at a time. But Marcus Hayes remained. Not as a headline, not as a cautionary tale, as a living testament to the truth that dignity, when guarded fiercely and quietly, could change not just a company, not just an industry, but the very hearts of the people within it. On a bright spring morning 2 years after that fateful day, Marcus stood at the edge of the runway watching a new jet lift into the sky, its engines humming smoothly. A product of hands trained not just in mechanics, but in something rarer and infinitely more powerful: integrity. As the plane climbed higher, Marcus allowed himself a rare, small smile, not of triumph, but of peace. He knew that true justice had never been about winning. It had always been about building something stronger, something that could endure. And standing there, under the endless stretch of blue sky, Marcus Hayes knew, with quiet certainty, that he had built exactly that. If this story touched you even a little, it would mean a like and subscribed. Every bit of your support helps us keep sharing stories that matter. I'd love to know what moment stood out to you the most, and where are you tuning in from today? Feel free to leave a comment below. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts.